Lately, I've had a very intriguing question rattling around inside my mind. How in the world did Solid Snake, the titular protagonist, or the old killer as he calls himself, of the Metal Gear Solid series, and probably the most recognizable figure in the Metal Gear series proper, end up in the world of Super Smash Bros? How did a man who fought against nuclear terror, encountered horrible experiments of war, held his enemies in his arms as they took their final breaths after violent confrontations on screen, and once even considered self-termination when confronted with his own imminent passing at the hands of a medical condition he couldn't control, end up standing on screen beside Mario? That's the question we're going to take a look at in today's video, because the story behind this crossover is both wholesome and fascinating. A lot of people think they know the entire thing, but there are elements to it that I think are really interesting that aren't often explored. Before we hop further into the video, if you do enjoy it, please consider leaving a like and subscribing for more videos. I do make content on all kinds of pop culture topics here, including DC and Marvel Comics characters, the Metal Gear franchise, Fallout, James Bond, Assassin's Creed, and more, and I'd love to hang out with you and have you along for the ride because it means the world to me. Now, I've said it before and I will say it again, I've always been a bit of a sucker for media crossovers. Now, when done poorly, be it in movies, TV, comics, or gaming, these crossovers can stick out like a sore thumb. In those cases, they're usually a fascinating time capsule of what not to do to promote your characters. However, when done well, the combination of multiple characters or universes, it can actually yield fascinating results. When it comes to unlikely crossovers, few come to mind like the world of Super Smash Bros. And the dark, violent, and political world of the Metal Gear franchise. So how did this actually happen? I mean, the easy answer to this question would be to simply point back to the history of Metal Gear on Nintendo platforms. While this isn't the full answer, to actually understand how this door was opened, we do need to do a brief recap on this history between Metal Gear and Nintendo itself. Metal Gear 1 did exist on the NES, and it's arguably the main reason why the Metal Gear franchise exists today in the form that it does. There's a lot to take a look at there that we'll probably talk about a different day, but to sum it up briefly, the original Metal Gear game was designed for the MSX2. This is a platform that was fairly irrelevant to the Western world. During this time, gaming platforms were fairly different in different locales, and the Nintendo Entertainment System was extremely popular in the West, especially in the United States of America. Now, I certainly don't want to spin this video in a way that makes it seem like the United States of America was more important for gaming than Japan. I don't believe that at all. They are just very different. But it is worth noting that the West is where Metal Gear found a lot of its success, even compared to its success in Japan. Konami, seeing the popularity of the NES in America in particular, decided that a version of Hideo Kojima's Metal Gear game should be available on the NES to capitalize off of Western gamers, and the infamous Metal Gear for NES was born. It's worth noting at this point that series creator Hideo Kojima actually hated this version of the game, revealing to Nintendo Power that he had absolutely no involvement in the development of the NES version, saying the NES version was a pitiful title, developed cheaply and simply by a small team in Tokyo. That was during the bubble economy, where anything and everything that was released would sell. I came across the game in a bargain bin and tried playing it, but the game design is pretty bad. He went on to condemn the game more thoroughly, even adding that he believed that those who created the NES version had no sliver of appreciation for the players, and referred to the game as an abomination. Yikes. But that abomination level port or version of Metal Gear, it did not stop the franchise from gaining a following in the West, as this lesser version of Metal Gear 1 would actually get its own unique sequel in the form of Snake's Revenge, and this would also prompt Kojima to return to the franchise to make a proper sequel to Metal Gear 2, Solid Snake, and eventually continue work on the Metal Gear Solid series as it's known today. Metal Gear Solid arguably established Solid Snake as a household name character when it came to the homes of PlayStation gamers, and later titles such as Metal Gear Solid 2 would also be ported as well to consoles like the original Xbox, with HD remasters later coming to the Xbox 360 and the PS3, and now the Metal Gear Solid Master Collection also coming to Nintendo Switch, PlayStation 4, 5, and the Xbox Series consoles. Nintendo did also receive the lesser talked about Metal Gear Ghost Babel on the Game Boy Color, which would oddly be renamed to just Metal Gear Solid in the West, despite clearly taking place in an alternate timeline after the original Metal Gear game. Now this timeline is something very interesting we might talk about in the future in another video, as it is actually hinted to contain the very unique Metal Gear Acid PSP games as well, but that's also a story and some speculation for another day entirely. But this wasn't the last of the Metal Gear games that would come to Nintendo consoles either, as a complete remake of Metal Gear Solid 1, Metal Gear Solid The Twin Snakes, would be developed by Silicon Knights exclusively for GameCube and released in 2004. This title was more over the top than the original game and also more divisive, but it did help introduce more modern Nintendo gamers at the time to the world of Metal Gear and the character of Solid Snake as well. Though this title didn't sell quite as well as it probably should have, reportedly selling actually less than 500,000 copies, it did reopen the door between the Metal Gear series and inclusion on Nintendo platforms, with Super Smash Bros. Brawl's release date only 4 years down the road from the 2004 release date of the Twin Snakes. So that's it, right? I mean, Metal Gear had a history, albeit a bit of a murky one, on Nintendo hardware. It even got 3 Nintendo exclusive games, Snake's Revenge, Ghost Babel, and the Twin Snakes, and an odd port of the original Metal Gear. It made sense for this franchise to receive a character representative in Nintendo's premier fighter, right? That's how it worked out. This all lined up well with the timeline of Super Smash Bros. Brawl, which would launch later in 2008, but that's not really why it happened. When speaking to Kotaku back in 2006, Masahiro Sakurai, the premier director of the Super Smash Bros. Series, revealed, "When I was developing Super Smash Bros. Melee for GameCube, Hideo Kojima contacted me and practically begged me to put him in there. But at that time, we were deep in development and it was too late." So hold up. That doesn't really make sense, does it? The Twin Snakes was released in 2004, but Super Smash Bros. Brawl wouldn't be released until 2008 on the Nintendo Wii. Well, much like many fairy tales and dreams, this strange turn of events would actually start from the dreams of a younger child. While speaking at the Smithsonian's The Art of Video Games exhibit, Hideo Kojima revealed to a crowd of interviewers that it was actually his son who suggested that Metal Gear should appear in Super Smash Bros. "My child likes Super Smash Bros, so we play it a lot together, and he told me that there's no character that you made in that game." Hideo Kojima gave this some thought and ended up actually approaching Masahiro Sakurai to ask him to include Solid Snake in Super Smash Bros. Melee. Kojima did always have connections with people at Nintendo, with Sakurai years later actually visiting Kojima Productions and publicly commenting that he believed Death Stranding was a remarkable game. While we don't know the exact extent of the friendship between these two, and I'm sure it's a bit more of a personal topic, we do know that a camaraderie and mutual respect does exist between them, which certainly helps when you're contacting someone at another company to ask about your character owned by a separate company being included in their game. There are definitely some hoops to hop through with licensing issues when it comes to that kind of thing. It's not really as easy as, hey, I made this person, put them in your game. There is also parent companies, rights licensing issues, and even censorship issues that have to be looked at when actually properly moving characters from series to series. It's also worth noting that because of some of these details, this was a bigger ask than you would actually think. Yes, there had been Metal Gear games on Nintendo platforms, but to this point, all of the characters in Super Smash Bros. Were first-party Nintendo characters, not third-party licensed characters or third-party characters licensed to create exclusive games. This was long before guest fighters were common in Smash Bros. This was many years before Sora, Cloud Strife, Joker, and others would be entering the Smash Bros. Roster as guests that represented different parts of the gaming atmosphere. At this time, during the creation of Melee, Smash was a roster of Nintendo-only characters. This was also during the mid-2000s when parents were a lot more jumpy about violence in video games, and especially gun violence, something that Solid Snake, if you've played his games, was known for. he definitely uses a gun. This is likely also why his moveset doesn't include the use of a real gun, even though gun weaponry would later become a bit more prevalent with characters like Joker in the later years of the Smash series. Technicalities aside of whether or not his gun is real, it looks real enough. Once parental concerns loosened up though, that was a bit less of an issue, but that's also some speculation on my part as to the actual development of moving Snake over. That said, there was always a high amount of respect between Hideo Kojima and some of the legendary creators associated with Nintendo, including Shigeru Miyamoto. During an interview with Nintendo's official magazine UK, in issue 134, Kojima actually revealed his admiration for Nintendo legend Miyamoto, saying, "I've known him quite a long time. The thing is, he's my master, so I do not want to become too friendly with him, because I always want to make sure that he's my master. I don't want to get too close." Now, a lot of people have looked at the phrasing of this translation and have pointed out that this is likely a bit of a mistranslation, with Kojima probably referring to Miyamoto more as his sensei or his mentor, but either way we do get to see the admiration and appreciation Kojima had for Miyamoto here in this quote, and that he had multiple points of contact at Nintendo that would allow him to get in touch with those around the Smash Bros. Series relatively easily. So then the question becomes, why was Solid Snake himself chosen? Kojima's son wanted to see a character that his father created, but why did his father choose to pursue the inclusion of Solid Snake himself specifically? This was also revealed at the same Smithsonian exhibit, as Kojima answered in an interview, "As you know, we did make Twin Snakes, but generally speaking there hasn't been a lot of Metal Gear on Nintendo platforms. So from that perspective, I thought it was a good way to expose younger people to this character, Snake." Snake had been the heart and soul of the Metal Gear franchise going all the way back to its beginning, and he was also the primary character of Twin Snakes, a GameCube exclusive game, which really made him a shoo-in for a recommendation from his main creator. There are certainly also some footnotes to mention as to the specifics of what would happen with Snake after his inclusion, as the character was absent from the franchise for a few years. He did not return in Super Smash Bros. For Wii U or 3DS, with many speculating that the tense relationship at the time between Konami and Hideo Kojima himself had something to do with that lack of inclusion, while others believe that Sakurai just went a different direction with the game. When Kojima was asked about Snake reappearing in Super Smash Bros. 4 during an interview in March of 2014, he replied, "I'm not working on that game, but I don't think it's likely. If Mr. Sakurai is watching this, hopefully we see Snake." Unfortunately, there aren't a lot of direct answers as to why Snake did not return in those games. There was speculation, like I said, but he was ultimately brought back for inclusion in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, albeit with a few gameplay changes having been made lighter, receiving a new Final Smash, and some other tweaks and differences that would be too technical for this video, and they would probably go over my own head and rain the hellfire of the Smash community down upon me. I really like these games, but I'm not exactly a pro gamer who goes to Smash tournaments. I just enjoy playing them. Overall, Solid Snake is such a fun inclusion to the Smash series. It does what it set out to do. Introduces a new generation of players to Snake himself and the Metal Gear franchise while celebrating his iconography as a gaming legend with those who already appreciated the Metal Gear series. The hopes of a young child who just wanted to see one of the characters his father made show up in one of his other unrelated favorite video games actually helped usher in a new era for the Smash series as well. It helped open the door for future guest characters like Cloud Strife, Sephiroth, Sora, and more that aren't often associated solely with Nintendo to join this roster and take part in this unique series of stories that are formed in the world of Smash Bros. And I think that's pretty cool that it just went from some kid dreaming about how he wanted to see his dad's characters show up in a game to an entire wave of characters that joined the roster and took part in these unique and fun stories. It's really neat to think about that it all kind of started with something so simple. If you enjoyed today's video, I'd love if you considered subscribing for more content and check back for new videos. I cover all kinds of pop culture topics that I love on this channel, including Marvel and DC Comics characters, the Metal Gear franchise, Fallout, Assassin's Creed, James Bond, and more, and I love this channel and truly appreciate those who have helped make it possible. If you enjoyed today's video, leaving a like, subscribing, commenting, and letting me know what you thought about it, and maybe even considering checking out some of the ways to help support this channel, like our Patreon in the description down below, or the join button to join our channel memberships and receive access to exclusive goodies. Those are all great ways to help support this channel that I really truly do appreciate. I hope to see you in future videos as we tackle more topics in pop culture, talk more about Metal Gear, Assassin's Creed, Fallout, and more, like I said before, and I'm looking forward to it. So I hope you all have a fantastic day, and as always everyone, stay shui.